Muy buenos días a todas y a todos. Nos da muchísimo gusto recibirles en la Facultad de Arquitectura de la Universidad Nacional Autónoma 26, el arquitecto Smiljan Radic Clark. Agradezco la distinguida presencia de los arquitectos Liu Jiakun y Francis Queré, laureados con el Premio Pritzker en 2025 y 2022. De manera muy especial, agradezco que esté todo el jurado reunido el día de hoy. Está Alejandro Aravena, Barry Berhoff, Deborah Berg, Andrea Aranja, Anne Lacatón, Hashim Sarkis, Kazuyo Sejima y, por supuesto, Manuela Luca, que es la directora ejecutiva del Premio Pritzker, y Eunice Kim, quien nos ayudó con toda esta planeación y quien hizo posible que estuvieran hoy aquí en esta facultad. Muchas gracias otra vez al Premio Pritzker por este regalo que nos hacen el día de hoy. Especialmente agradezco al arquitecto Smiljan Radic, ganador de este año, nacido en Chile y representante de una arquitectura latinoamericana que con orgullo compartimos desde México. Les damos la más cordial bienvenida a esta casa de estudios, en un año especialmente simbólico para nuestra universidad. Celebra 475 años de historia universitaria desde su fundación como la Real Universidad de México. Esta es su casa, la UNAM es su casa. Esperamos que esta sea la primera de muchas visitas. Para nuestra facultad, recibir este tipo de encuentros representa mucho más que una conferencia magistral. Significa abrir un espacio de diálogo entre la arquitectura contemporánea y nuestra comunidad universitaria. Es acercar a nuestras y nuestros estudiantes, profesores y profesoras, investigadoras e investigadores, y reafirmando la vocación pública, cultural e internacional de la UNAM, como un lugar donde las ideas, la crítica, la reflexión pueden compartirse de manera abierta. La presencia del Premio Pritzker en nuestra universidad también nos recuerda la importancia de inspirar a nuevas generaciones de profesionistas desde América Latina, entendiendo la arquitectura no solamente como construcción, sino como una toma de decisiones y una forma de imaginar, interpretar y transformar esta realidad. En este sentido, recordar a quienes han dado forma al pensamiento arquitectónico latinoamericano es también una manera de entender el alcance cultural de este reconocimiento. El martes 3 de junio de 1980, el arquitecto Luis Barragán envió su discurso para ser leído en la ceremonia del Premio Pritzker de ese año. Barragán es el único arquitecto mexicano que ha sido distinguido con este valioso galardón y en aquella ocasión expresó lo siguiente, cito: "Tengo plena conciencia de que el premio que se me otorga es un acto de reconocimiento de la universalidad de la cultura y en particular de la cultura de mi patria, pero como nunca nadie se debe todo a sí mismo, sería mezquino no recordar en este momento la colaboración, la ayuda y el estímulo que he recibido a lo largo de mi vida por parte de colegas, dibujantes, fotógrafos, escritores, periodistas y amigos personales que han tenido la bondad de interesarse en mis trabajos". Barragán envió además una serie de pensamientos para expresar la ideología de su obra a partir de 11 principios profundamente significativos en su arquitectura: religión y mito, belleza, silencio, soledad, serenidad, alegría, muerte, jardines, fuentes, arquitectura, el arte de ver y la nostalgia. Muchos de estos temas, la memoria, el silencio, la emoción, la relación entre la materia y la imaginación, siguen atravesando hoy algunas de las reflexiones más relevantes de la arquitectura contemporánea en América Latina. 46 años después, estamos reunidos para celebrar a un arquitecto chileno cuya obra ha despertado emoción, curiosidad, crítica y reflexión más allá del objeto arquitectónico. Radic pertenece a una generación de arquitectos chilenos cuya obra ha alcanzado una presencia e influencia global. Cuando describe sus proyectos, como podremos escucharlo hoy de primera mano, suele hablar de las ideas que rodean el ejercicio proyectual, entendiendo el aprendizaje como un proceso que se nutre de otras disciplinas y del diálogo con filósofos, matemáticos, diseñadores y escultores. En 2018, Smiljan recibió un libro curioso, ameno y singular, Cada tanto aparece un perro que habla y otros ensayos. Una publicación que describe muy bien la personalidad del hoy galardonado con el Premio Pritzker. Para limpiar un armario debemos convertirlo en ruina. La ruina es necesaria para demostrar al otro que aquí ha ocurrido algo. Es lo extremo necesario para la nueva construcción. Hoy, con esa misma idea de memoria y demostración histórica a la que se refiere el arquitecto, tenemos la fortuna de contar con su presencia y con la de los arquitectos Giacun y Queré. La visita de arquitectos y arquitectas que han marcado el pensamiento contemporáneo ha dejado una huella importante en la historia reciente de nuestra facultad en Culhas y en 2023 a la arquitecta Kazuyo Sejima, ambos galardonados con el Premio Pritzker en 2000 y 2010 respectivamente. Sin embargo, esta es la primera vez que recibimos en la Facultad de Arquitectura a 3 arquitectos laureados con el Premio Pritzker en un mismo encuentro, y ello representa un motivo de enorme orgullo y emoción. Agradecemos profundamente la confianza y la decidida convicción del equipo y la organización del Premio Pritzker por hacernos parte de este importante reconocimiento. Y como muestra de aprecio y la admiración de nuestra comunidad universitaria, haremos entrega de un reconocimiento a nuestros distinguidos invitados por su invaluable contribución a la arquitectura y al pensamiento cultural de nuestro tiempo. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, doctora. A continuación, escucharemos un mensaje de Manuela Luca Dacio, directora ejecutiva del Premio Pritzker.
Buenos días y muchísimas gracias a la directora Mónica Segudo Collera, a UNAM y a Ciudad de México. Unfortunately, my Spanish ends here. On behalf of the Pritzker Architecture Prize, it is a great pleasure today to share with you the celebration of the 2026 ceremony. It is taking place here at UNAM and will be followed by a public lecture of Smiljan Radic-Clark and then by conversation with fellow laureates Liu Jiakun and Francis Queré. I want to give a warm thank you to all of you who are here today in Mexico City and online from all over the world to be with us and share this moment and celebrate architecture. But allow me also a quick but very deep thank you to the Pritzker Prize jury. It's their vision and their commitment to architecture as a profoundly powerful instrument to advance both humanity and the built environment that has brought Smiljan Radic, Liu Jiakun, and Francis Queré today in front of you. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to the jury members who are here with us today, starting with the jury chair, Alejandro Aravena. Barry Bergdahl. Deborah Berg. Andrea Aragna Correa do Lago. Anla Caton. Kazuya Sejima. And Hashim Sarkis. Stephen Breyer cannot be with us today, but is with us in spirit. And allow me also a very special thank you to 3 persons who have contributed to the best success and organization of this event. Mrs. Eunice Kim, who's the Director of Communication and Press of the Prize. And the Administrative Director of the Prize, Mrs. Janine Jeskevits. And then a new honorary member of the Pritzker Prize, Mrs. Liu Martin, who's Liu Jiakun's son and translator. We like to consider him part of our team. Well, since 1979, when it was established in Chicago through the vision and generosity of Jay and Cindy Pritzker, the Pritzker Architecture Prize has continued to acknowledge, regardless of nationality and ideology, the most distinguished creative accomplishments that deepen our sensitivity, our awareness, and our responsibility towards humanity and the built environment. And each Pritzker laureate is a sign of the times, embodying the present and also anticipating the future of the discipline. Our present time is a time of profound transformation. Our values are shifting. Our language is evolving. And the ways in which we see the world are being reshaped. At times, this can feel unsettling. There is uncertainty, a sense that we no longer know what will replace the certainties we once held. And yet, this very willingness to question, to challenge our assumptions, tells us something very important, that we are living in an age of experimentation, an age of possibility. And therefore, while the Pritzker Prize represents the highest recognition within architecture, it also carries a deeper responsibility, the responsibility to act as a catalyst for inquiry, for reflection, and for change. And it is, I think, this shared responsibility that brings us together here today. UNAM, with its enduring commitment to education, research, and dissemination of culture. Ourselves, the Pritzker Prize jury and laureates. And you, architects, future architects, and perhaps simply those who really care deeply about architecture and its role in the world. Because the more voices we engage, the more perspectives we encounter, the richer our understanding becomes. And this is not about replacing knowledge. This is about expanding it, opening it up, and allowing it to grow. And while we often think and speak of social justice, climate justice, environmental justice, we rarely speak of knowledge in the same terms. And yet, knowledge equity is no less essential. So perhaps our task is this, to learn to see differently and to act differently within the systems that we inhabit and alongside them. Because only through shift can we begin to build genuine connections, to foster a meaningful dialogue, and ultimately to create lasting change. So in this very spirit, please join me giving the warmest welcome to the 2026 Pritzker Prize laureate, Smiljan Radic-Clark.
Bueno, quizá apagar las luces, ¿no? Ah. Muchas gracias por venir, muchas gracias por la invitación. Leeré una introducción un poco desmedida y luego les mostraré la parte que me parece más importante, que es el discurso de agradecimiento ilustrado y ampliado del premio Pritzker que presenté ayer. Me pareció importante compartirlos con ustedes y ilustrarlo al mismo momento, porque ayer fue una especie de discurso, sí, nada más que eso. Para todo esto, por fortuna para usted y compromiso de mi parte, tengo 30 minutos así que me gustaría que dejemos que la primera parte de las imágenes que ustedes van a ver corran distraídas, digámoslo de esa manera, a mi espalda. Estas imágenes se refieren a proyectos que yo he hecho, y imágenes, etcétera. Hay una multitud de cosas más o menos perdidas, pero que ustedes, muchos de ellos las conocen, pero después hablaré de eso. En 1998, creo que fue ese año, y ahora que visité la casa de Barragán nuevamente, me di cuenta que sí era, porque estaba en el escrito, en el libro de visita, el año que yo visité esa casa, que era el 1998. Visité por primera vez México también. Me invitaron junto a varios arquitectos a dar una conferencia en Querétaro. Me preocupaba especialmente tener que hablar durante 45 minutos, en ese momento, sobre lo poco que había construido en esos momentos. Apenas 2 pequeños artefactos, podríamos decir, porque en cierta medida me obligaba, y eso es real, a crear un cierto relato que de una manera extraña tenía que, podríamos decir, dar oxígeno a esos objetos, otorgarle una cierta sobrevida. Se podrían haber explicado en 10 minutos y tenía que hablar 45. Había que darle oxígeno e inventar una cierta historia alrededor de ello. No sabía antes de la conferencia, antes de aceptar la conferencia, que me tendría que enfrentar sin remedio a la llamada, o a lo que nosotros por lo menos desde Chile llamábamos escala mexicana. Amable pero bastante intimidante, medida en esa ocasión precisa por 2.000 personas sentadas frente a ti en un gran galpón un poco desangelado, atentas, escuchando. Esas 2.000 personas eran reales, es como 2.000 personas mirándote. Obviamente, si hubiera sido consciente en ese momento de esa escala mexicana, por un cierto pudor constante en mi vida, jamás habría aceptado la invitación. Si esta ignorancia me ha salvado de muchas cosas, y no estar conectado me ha salvado de muchas cosas, incluso me ha traído otros problemas, pero me ha salvado de muchas cosas. Al final de la charla, llegado el momento crítico de las preguntas, vi que un joven mexicano, más o menos de mi edad en esos momentos, estamos hablando del 98, 30 años, 30 y tantos años menos, se levanta de su asiento, pide el micrófono y me interpela. Lo hace en inglés. En ese momento yo sabía mucho menos inglés que ahora, y ahora todavía sigo sabiendo poco inglés, lo que me dio una cierta ventaja, porque asociada mi poco inglés a una cierta ignorancia, no puedo entender todos los adjetivos que él usó al referirse a mi obra. Lo que sí entendí, que sin ningún tipo de clemencia en esos momentos, me preguntó acerca del interés que podría tener mostrar esos artefactos, esas 2 cosas que había construido. Uno en adobe de quema, o sea, una cosa bastante primitiva, y otro en madera, en carpintería de madera sin usar clavos. Cuando estábamos entrando, y ese era su argumento, en plena era de la digitalización, ¿qué interés podrían tener esos artefactos si el mundo al que pertenecían, con un cierto olor a difunto, y que yo presentaba en realidad con mucho orgullo, pronto iba a quedar enterrado en el cajón de los olvidos, de los recuerdos? En realidad después entendí que no me interpelaba tanto por mis construcciones dibujadas a mano y transmitidas en esos momentos por diapositiva. Muchos de ustedes no saben lo que es una diapositiva seguramente, las cuales no tenían nada de malo. Mis cosas estaban bien hechas, y eran lo suficientemente raras para haber sido invitado a una conferencia en Querétaro ante 2.000 personas. En realidad, sino que él me interpelaba, o por lo menos lo que traté de entender después, por una sospechosa mirada distraída, que esas cosas protegían. Una mirada distraída me refiero a una mirada ausente de lo que realmente importaba en ese momento en el campo de la arquitectura y también en el mundo en general. Lo único que pude responder a ese joven que tenía mi misma edad y que hablaba bastante mejor que yo, fue que esas construcciones eran lo único que yo sabía hacer. Sabía hacer solo eso, esos artefactos y nada más. Y esa como falta de impostura era lo que salvaba a esos artefactos. Todo lo otro, incluso hablar en público o relatar historias, muchas veces yo sentía que me vestía con una fea impostura, una postura que nunca me ha gustado. Adivino, porque nunca hablé nuevamente con ese joven, que la respuesta que yo di a ese joven mexicano, honesta y simplona, le habrá parecido mucho peor de lo esperado. Viniendo además de un joven arquitecto chileno de los años 90, lo que significaba un profesional al día y con empuje. Algo así como una especie de emprendedor contemporáneo, aunque menos institucionalizado, menos digitalmente formateado, si se pudiera decir de alguna manera. Debo decir también que en la conferencia inmediatamente posterior a la mía, el arquitecto Marcos Novak mostró algunos experimentos de una arquitectura digital preformal mezclada con poesía. Algo extremadamente precioso y motivador, sobre todo para la juventud, para nosotros en esos momentos muy jóvenes. Sobre todo porque su arquitectura en esos momentos se alejaba de una mala versión de la arquitectura digital de ese entonces. Una que resultaría por años triunfante, aquella que mostraba imágenes de edificios convencionales, deformados, tajeados o cubiertos con una cierta sobreactuados parásitos orgánicos, como horribles anamorfosis de una realidad en vías de extinción. Eran caricaturas, esa otra línea de la arquitectura digital, eran remeos de una vieja realidad física constructiva a un protagonista, trasladada literalmente a una digital todavía no explorada. En cambio, en lo que recuerdo de la arquitectura de Marcos Novak, en ese momento, lo digital ocupaba su espacio natural. Era liviana, era inaprensible. Su forma y su materia eran electricidad. Su material constructivo, una cierta inteligencia artificial prehistórica, mezclada con poesía. Me refiero a versos concretos, tomados de poetas contemporáneos, podríamos decir físicos también, si eso realmente tiene algún sentido en ese campo del conocimiento. Esos poemas explotaban al tocarlos en constelaciones virtuales que se desencadenaban en otro tipo de constelaciones a través de un vuelo en la pantalla. Lo extraordinario de esa arquitectura era que ese mundo en la pantalla aparecía por momentos como la única naturaleza posible. Estamos hablando de los 90. Después de esa charla comprendí que el joven mexicano tenía razón, que lo que yo hacía tenía fecha de vencimiento, que asistía en los comienzos de mi trabajo, y esto es paradójico, a una especie de muerte prematura de mis propios proyectos futuros. Aún sigo creyendo lo mismo. Por lo mismo, esta presentación se basa en la deuda que aún tengo con ese antiguo interlocutor mexicano, al cual espero, por pudor, no encontrármelo nuevamente hoy en esta presentación. Al menos seleccionamos la pregunta y sé que no está aquí. Es como... Esta conferencia, o esta conferencia de 30 minutos, trata de ilustrar esa mirada distraída, ausente. En la rutina de la oficina de arquitectura existen proyectos, por lo general construidos gratis o casi gratis, para amigos y conocidos, que muchas veces saben, sobre todo en un comienzo, más o menos lo que haces y que te aprecian muchas veces más como amigo que como arquitecto. También en esa rutina hay obsesiones personales que no tienen mucho que ver con el trabajo diario, pero que rozan sus lindes y los devuelven y los disuelven. Malas y buenas compañías, materiales encontrados, alrededores confusos. También se cruzan a veces algunos concursos con buenos jurados y proyectos oficiales abordados con ignorancia, lo que permite tomar decisiones extrañas e inusuales. Todos estos eventos, relativamente poco usuales, distraen el cauce normal de las cosas en un estudio de arquitectura pequeño. Y por fortuna, muchas veces, sin darnos cuenta, se transforman estas mismas cosas en el cauce normal de las cosas en un estudio pequeño, empujando el quehacer a un cotidiano fuera de sí. Esas imágenes, que creo aún corren tras de mí distraídas, son parte de ese cauce distraído. Pero ahora, una vez que ellas terminen de dar vueltas, falta un poco, me gustaría revisar algo que pueden parecer aún más primitivo, pero que parecen parte de ese cauce también. Debo decir, honestamente, que no he logrado preparar en estos últimos meses, tan escasos de tiempo, una conferencia al día sobre mis propias construcciones, o sobre aquello que aún quedaría por decir de ellas. Sospecho también que, sin embargo, que al igual que me ocurre a mí, y esto espero comprensión, ustedes también estarán algo cansados de verlas repetidas una y otra vez, en loop por todas partes, como si fuera una especie de prédica de plaza. Hoy, como dije al inicio, me pareció justo compartir con ustedes una versión ilustrada de mi discurso de agradecimiento por el premio Pritzker que presenté ayer. En él, busco transmitir que el viaje en la arquitectura, cuyos comienzos datan del siglo XVIII, hoy, más que nunca, es una dimensión ineludible de la práctica arquitectónica contemporánea. Y sostener que las visitas a cualquier lugar bien fundado constituyen una forma única e intransferible de cultivar una inteligencia natural, hoy más que nunca necesaria. La arquitectura existe entre grandes formas, masivas y duraderas, artefactos curiosos que resisten bajo el sol durante siglos esperando nuestra visita, y construcciones pequeñas y frágiles, efímeras como la vida de una mosca, menos de 15 días, las que muchas veces no tienen un destino claro bajo la luz humana, demasiado humana. Comprender la arquitectura como un entramado de acontecimientos dispares permite que dentro de nuestra práctica se abra un campo valioso, disperso, en el que tanto los dibujos de un pequeño proyecto abortado de los años 60, como una bolsa plástica llena de gente, o un simple montículo en medio del campo que cubre un cuerpo, así como un gran edificio construido en una ciudad consolidada, o el resto de una ruina cercada, pueden ser nombrados por gracia y bajo ciertas circunstancias precisas con la palabra arquitectura. He viajado para visitar edificios especialmente, y otras cosas raras también, de manera consciente, pero menos de lo que quisiera, en gran medida empujado por la lejanía de mi país. No había otra forma de aprender arquitectura, especialmente en los años inmediatamente posteriores a mi egreso de la Escuela de Arquitectura en Santiago, cuando parecía haber tanto tiempo por delante, tanto tiempo para perder. Quiero compartir con ustedes algunos de esos momentos de esos viajes que parecían insignificantes, distraídos en los momentos que estaba ahí, pero que con el paso del tiempo han ido adquiriendo un sentido único e intransferible. Vamos a esperar que esta cosa termine y ahí les muestro de qué se trata. Decían en el discurso de ayer, aquí tengo un problema. Decía en el discurso de ayer, quiero agradecer en primer lugar a la arquitectura. Especialmente a la luz negra que habita el hall del Palacio de la Asamblea de Chandigarh, a su cielo ahumado por las hogueras primitivas que Le Corbusier parecía buscar en sus dibujos. Quiero agradecer al interior de la mítica iglesia de San Salvatore, en Rialto, con sus cúpulas en línea como si fuera una fábrica de ampolletas enormes. Al dibujo de una barca grafitada con trazos delgados. No estaba avanzando. Oh. Sorry. Okay. Let's try again. Bueno, partamos de nuevo. Decía ayer en mi discurso, quiero agradecer en primer lugar a la arquitectura, especialmente a la luz negra que habita el hall del Palacio de la Asamblea en Chandigarh, a su cielo ahumado por las hogueras primitivas que Le Corbusier parecía buscar en sus dibujos. Al interior de la mítica iglesia de San Salvatore, en Rialto, con sus cúpulas en línea como si fuera una fábrica de ampolletas enormes. Al dibujo de una barca grafitado con trazos delgados sobre un tinglado de madera en la iglesia de Detif, en la isla de Lemuy, descubierto en 1997. Al eco de ese dibujo, un barco visto desde popa, grafitado sobre la jamba de piedra de la puerta del Hospital de Venecia, a esa fachada poblada de leones en falsa perspectiva. Y frente a esos leones, al caballo del Colleone de Verrocchio, tantas veces dibujado en andas por los aires. No muy lejos, al Cristo marchito de la Pietà de Bellini, en que flota colgada en la penumbra de la iglesia de San Giovanni Paolo. Gracias a toda Venecia. Gracias a la caída suave del empedrado en los lavaderos de Juan Herrera, en Ocaña, que visité arrastrado por la obsesión de un amigo matemático en 1991. A las pesadas pircas de piedra negra que cruzan los suelos volcánicos de Rapa Nui, saltando sobre moais caídos, arrastrados desde las orillas rocosas por viejos tsunamis. A los ojos blancos de los moais desaparecidos sobre el pasto arrancado de raíz por manadas de caballos famélicos. A los montículos de piedra que descienden a tropezones por las colinas de la isla de Brač, en Croacia. Desde donde zarpó mi abuelo rumbo a Chile en 1919. A esas cicatrices sobre la superficie rocosa, tensa como piel de asna. A sus higueras y viejos olivos retorcidos, entre ruinas insignificantes. A la extraña folía, construida por el poeta Vladimir Nazor, en esa isla, en homenaje a sus 3 hermanas. De planta triangular y su alzado dórico incierto. A su apariencia anómala y distraída frente al mar tibio donde leíamos El marinero de Pessoa. A los corrales de cactus para encerrar burros y cabras en el desierto chileno. A las sepulturas de madera amarilla fosilizada en el desierto de Atacama. A esos pequeños corrales para muertos que parecen cunas de guaguas o viejos catres de ejércitos en campaña, amontonados en un cementerio cerca de la salitrera, donde mi abuelo llegó a trabajar desde una Croacia hambrienta en el fin del mundo. Gracias al aire fosilizado del desierto. A los vidrios pegoteados sobre las fachadas de ladrillo de la iglesia de St. Patrick en Klippan de Leverens, a esos agujeros infectados con la luz, con la penumbra que habita sus interiores. Al museo de la catedral de Hedmark en Hamar, desgrasado por Sverfen. a las columnas caídas en rodajas del templo de Poseidón en Cabo de Suño o en Kos. A la escalinata porticada de la Acrópolis de Lindos. A la extraña rampa del templo de Afaya en la isla de Egina, a sus grandes escalones donde pudimos comer nuestro picnic y dormir un momento en 1995. Y a las columnas dóricas del templo de Atena, asfixiadas entre la grasa de los gruesos muros medievales en la fachada lateral del Duomo di Siracusa. A la vista del mar Egeo en el invierno nevado de 1991, desde los frágiles balcones de madera colgados en lo alto del monasterio de Simonos Petra, y al ermitaño peruano que enfermó de improviso en su cueva húmeda y que no pudo visitar en esos días en blanco y negro del monte Athos. A las 6 noches en la Acrópolis de Yorgos Seferis, leído en la triste Creta de 1994. A los monasterios de Meteora, en la Tesalia de 1994, montados sobre las huellas de antiguos glaciares. A la bella resonancia del acueducto de Agua de Prata sobre el maravilloso poblado de Álvaro Siza, en la Évora de 1991. A la masa de ladrillo y piedra esculpida en forma de tortuga en la roca de Sasso Corvaro de Francesco Di Giorgio. A sus fortalezas dibujadas a fil de ferro, al ladrillo plegado en muros y suelos en la roca de Mondavio, a las nieblas que se cuelan en lo alto de los arcos romanos de la iglesia de Sant'Andrea en Mantua, de León Battista Alberti, descritas de esta manera por Aldo Rossi. A la gracia y gravedad de los granitos del pórtico del Panteón, de 1993. Al recuerdo de unas vasijas hinchadas como peces globos, ahogadas en el agua turbia de una pileta a ras de suelo en la casa de Barragán, en Ciudad de México, en 1998. A la alegre austeridad cruda del Sex Pompeya de Lina Bobardi del 2013. Y a los aires húmedos que atraviesan libres los cielos de la Escuela de Arquitectura de João Villanova Artigas en Sao Paulo. Al vaivén del Teatro del Mundo de Aldo Rossi. A su crujido anclado para siempre en el recuerdo de la punta de la dogana. A los llantos y pesares escuchados en el cementerio de San Cataldo. Y a la lectura de la autobiografía científica, el mejor tratado de arquitectura de nuestros tiempos. Al People Meet in Architecture de Kazuyo Sejima, en la Bienal Internacional de Arquitectura de Venecia del 2010, tan importante para nuestra generación. Al puerto de transbordo en la llegada de Naoshima, liviano como un espejismo. Al interior del Museo de Arte de Teshima, de Ryu Nishizawa, un sudario abandonado sobre las colinas, donde escuchamos por primera vez el graznar de un pelícano lejano a través de sus 2 oídos vaciados en el concreto. A los elegantes columbarios de la isla de Tinos en 1995. Y a los pichones rellenos con lentejas enanas que comimos más tarde, a finales de los 90 en Padua. A la razón arcaica de la Torre de los Números de Peter Wilson en Rotterdam. Y un poco más allá, a las hermosas malas costumbres que nos enseñó el Kunststadt de Rem Koolhaas. A la comida compartida con los nómades en las afueras de Jaisalmer. Y a la suave sombra de los paraguas de arpillera en las orillas del río Ganges. A la alegría de las carpas que cargamos en la India de 1995. Y al peregrinar liviano de los circos pobres chilenos, incansables, año tras año. A la nostalgia producida por el documental El circo más pequeño del mundo, de Joris Ivens, en el Valparaíso de 1963. Al tembloroso circo enano de Calder. Y a las animitas abandonadas en los caminos de Chile. Al empuje de las ideas de la nueva Babilonia de Constant, a sus espacios devoradores. A los plásticos inflados de la contracultura de fines de los 60, a sus experimentos baratos. Al libro Victims del arquitecto John Heddup, donde las borraduras suponen existencias anteriores y la tinta el recuerdo de un olvido. Gracias al aire aterrorizado de nuestros tiempos. A la delicada casa con suelo de tierra de Katsuo Shinohara, visitadas el 2022. Y a la casa Tanikawa, con su sombra tendida sobre una suave colina. Gracias al inmenso interior de la cueva de Oya, en Utsunomiya. Gracias al silencio del agua en la cisterna de Santa Sofía, en Constantinopla. A los injertos de luz y fe encajados a la fuerza entre las columnas de la mezquita de Córdoba. A una noche fría en el convento de la Tourette en el 2018. A una suave cama de madera suspendida sobre largas patas, separada de una naturaleza sospechosamente amable en la Indonesia reciente. A las delgadas bóvedas de la Casa de los Bichos, de Miguel Ayquem, en Santiago de Chile. A esa arquitectura sin grasa. A la casa egipcia, fuera de sí, en la playa de Tanumé, en la costa antigua chilena, cargada de trigo. a la cripta profunda en la pirámide de Giza, en el Cairo, de 1992, adornada con un cielo azul cobalto sembrado de estrellas amarillas, al Egipto color tierra. A la pesada pierna desprendida del santo Santiago el Mayor, el gigante pintado por Mantegna en la capilla Ovetari de Padua. A las flores perdidas en 1991 en el Creto di Burri, en Sicilia. Muy cerca del Teatrino sin destino de Francesco Venezia. A los papeles abandonados en una pequeña caja de madera con dibujos y saludos de estudiantes de arquitectura, en la tumba de un arquitecto gigante y muy querido, Enric Mirallés, en el cementerio de Igualada. Gracias al aire sólido por venir. Terminaba el discurso de ayer diciendo a estos y muchos otros momentos en la arquitectura que conviven como un collage sin sentido en una mente que, como diría el cineasta Raúl Ruiz, nació en un país con una cronología insegura y una historia poco sólida. En estos días, cuando el cielo se cae a pedazos y la tierra cruje, quiero agradecer a mis pocos amigos de toda la vida, a ellos que me han educado, a otros viejos queridos de data reciente, a mis socios momentáneos y a mis colaboradores de siempre. Agradecer a mis extraños clientes, a mi familia, especialmente a mi mujer, la escultora Marcela Correa, a quien también le pertenece este reconocimiento, de una manera extraña e incalculable. A la calma de nuestro hijo y a la fragilidad de nuestra hija, que logra contenernos. Quiero agradecer por último la confianza del jurado en mi trabajo y a la familia Pritzker por otorgarme este reconocimiento, que espero merecer con mayor propiedad en los años por venir. Gracias, muchas gracias. Así termina el discurso.
Muchas gracias, Silvan, por compartir nuestra inspiración. Daremos paso ahora daremos paso ahora al panel de conversación con la participación de los arquitectos Smiljan Radic, Liu Jae-kun y Francis Keren. Nos apoyará en la traducción Martin Liu.
What a wonderful presentation. Thank you, Smiljan.
Sorry for the mistake, but
No mistake.
always happen, never you could lose at that kind of things,
Well, I think we're all still under the emotion of such a generous, wonderful journey into your work, into your memories, and ultimately into your life. So I would like to start this conversation on the same kind of personal tone, also involving our two friends, Francis and Jakun. And I would like to start by asking them, since you have already told us a lot, about what has been like a special instrument for your work and for your life, something like what Smiljan has described as travel as a fundamental criteria for his own experience. So some kind of tool that is not too obvious, that has been crucial in your personal and working experience. You want to start, Francis?
Okay. So, first of all, I would like to, from deep of my heart, really congratulate our new family member for winning this prestigious award.
Thank you.
Congratulations, and thank you for all of you for being here. I love Mexico. To be honest, my work has been always like trying to create a bridge between Germany, that I consider as my intellectual home, but also my emotional part. It was Burkina Faso. When I've been traveling a lot, traveling to fix things, and every time when I met Anne and Jean-Philippe Vassal to give a lecture, so when we finished the lecture, we start to talk about Africa, the connection, and then about my fight, how to explain, first of all, drawings, and engineering to people from my place who never heard about the term of architecture. And it was always a fight. If you just look at me carefully, and that is the secret I haven't said to many people, you see this finger is a little bit different than the others. I will be trying to trace on the soil, on the sand, to explain my people, this is what we should do, and always pushing my people to really work and trust. Normally, to become an architect, or let me put it this way, to become a builder in my culture, you have to follow an older person who knows how to build. And then, after long years, you know how to build. And the entire community know that you're having an apprentice and you learn how to build. In my case, it was very different. I just came from Germany, having a big heart for my community, after I have learned how to do basic engineering, but also to design. And I told my people, look, I'm going to build. You can imagine the skepticism when people start to look, but we know him, it's just Francis, he left us. We never saw him in construction site. How can he be able to build a school? And over the top, a school is something introduced by the French. And we need to build it out of glass and concrete. And I had no money for glass and concrete. I had clay. And I keep explaining to my people, it is possible to use clay and create a modern building. It was always a battle, trying to bridge what I have learned in the Western world, but with my culture. And that has been a battle where you explain and explain, you always explain. In the other part, I don't want to tell you, if you come to Germany, and I was saying I'm building a school for my community, I met basically all the initiative in Germany, all the political parties, and they didn't believe that a school is your concern and not the concern of government. Because in Germany, everything is so well organized. So to make it short, it was always a translation, playing a role of a bridge, transforming myself, going to Burkina Faso, sitting in the soil with the women, trying to trace, trying to think about how we could use clay and make a clay floor. Coming back to Germany, I have to play a cultivated person, sit in the classroom and try to talk with my peers, but my brain was always in Burkina Faso. And this has been really my struggle, really trying to link with my community. And then, and to the student today, I want to say, this is not just one way to architecture. So look at my career.
Wonderful, still ongoing. And what about you, Jakun? Smiljan was talking about, I think Smiljan, you said personal obsessions. You mentioned. What are your personal obsessions and starting points?
首先我是祝贺斯米良获得普利兹克奖。斯米良在中国的学生和青年建筑师里边，很受欢迎。
First of all, I want to congratulate you to being the new laureate of the Pritzker Prize. And in China, your work is very inspired among the young architects and the students.
因为过去大概30年，想到中国都是大规模的建设，但是那个时代已经过去了。
So for the past 30 years in China, it's always about the mass construction of buildings, but that era has been passed already.
有些因为那个大规模建设而来学建筑的学生和现在的一些年轻的建筑师，他们感觉没有希望再得到很大的项目。
So the students back then and the young architects right now have different goals for their architecture because it's not about the mass buildings anymore.
他们有些迷茫。
So they're confused, and then they don't have a clear goal right now.
斯米良的作品就给出了一种启示，就是不管是项目的大小，如果可以做的深度能够做够，并且在艺术的上面能够有做得够好，它其实不管大小也能取得很高的成就。
So for Smiljan's work, gave a lot of inspiration to the young architects in China, because no matter how the size of the building, as long as it has depth and also artistic values, you will always have a success, and it's also an achievement.
我给媒体写了一段那个关于斯米良的那个评价啊。
So I've written a passage for the press about your work.
我不知道他们发表没有，我就先在这儿把它念了。
I don't know if the press has gone out for this quote, but I will just read it right now.
斯米良的作品具有强烈的原创性和复杂而又明确的文化气质。
Smiljan's work possesses a powerful sense of originality and a cultural temperament that is both complex and distinct.
激进、深刻、敏感、决绝。
It is radical, profound, sensitive, and uncompromising.
微妙而迷人。
It's subtle yet enchanting.
充满想象力与诗意。
It's saturated with imagination and poetic grace.
斯米良创新了建筑的组织方法。
And he has innovated architectural organizational methods.
揭示了材料的本质。
And revealed the true essence of materials.
唤醒了个人感知。
And awakened the individual perceptions.
拓展了表达语言。
And expanded the language of expression in architecture.
建筑学是一门艺术。
And I think architecture is a form of art.
斯米良在建筑艺术的道路上走得很远。
And I think Smiljan has advanced very far in the pursuit of architectural artistry.
好，我现在是得回答一下问题。
And now I'll answer the question.
Thank you so much.
每次在那个不管在哪个学校里，年轻的学生总要问一下有没有什么工具啊。
So almost at every lecture I did back in the days, the students always ask about like what kind of tools I use.
尤其在中国啊。
Especially in China.
因为中国的那个传统的那个功夫片里边啊，总是有一个情节，就是只要得到了一个盒子，盒子里边有一个什么图，你就看了以后，你就成为了那个绝世高手。又成为了李小龙。
So, in China, there's always a plot in like kung fu movies, and that when you receive a box and there's some drawing inside, and you see the drawing and you become the master of this skill.
我说没有。 没有这样一个合作。
Oh, but in fact, that doesn't exist at all.
我自己的工具，其实就是仔细的生活，仔细的观察，认真的生活，仔细的观察。
But I think my tool is just to find details in life and always observe.
如果说我有一些和其他建筑师不一样的地方，可能是由于我在做建筑之前，我更喜欢文学。
Maybe one thing different about me and other architects is that I was more into literature before I began to do architecture.
这样就可以得到多一种参照系。
So there's another thing for me to be inspired from.
比如说建筑里的这个事情，可能你会在文学里边已经得到解答啊。
Maybe there are some issues in architecture that's already been answered in literature.
所以最后要说那个工具就是根据自己的兴趣，尽可能做自己热爱的事情，而不要听别人怎么讲，也不要听我怎么讲。
So my tool is actually to follow your own interest and don't listen to others, and don't listen to me also.
Well, I know that the three of you are all a big source of inspiration for your students, young architects, established architects. And continuing on a personal note, what has brought you to architecture? I mean, and how were your formational years? And could you tell us more about some crucial encounter that you had in those years, like, I don't know, a building, a place, a book, an architect?
Yeah, these questions appear all around, you know, about where was the epiphany, something like that, epiphany about that. I was always distracted in the sense of I'm not paid too much attention to the future. The future is, I mean, you have to be really responsible with your present. It's not about your future. And then I think the best way to do the work is just worry about to do the best way that you could do it in the present. And then when I have to choose a career, I just said, oh, I draw a little bit good horses that my mom correct me every, you know, some way, and I do some normal drawings, you know, and that was, you know, I mean, in that moment in Chile you have 4 careers, more than the officials one, you know, no more than then, and you have to choose this, and I choose architect, and that's it. It's not complicated. It's not about. For me, it was really easy because it was there. I mean, it's not. I feel a lot of young people is just looking before to live, and that is really complicated, I think. Because you don't have experience of you have to leave a little bit more and then choose, you know, and then go ahead with your choosing. And when you and then this is easy from the 60s that I have, you know, but from the beginning it's not really easy. But I think it's the decisions of when you see the decision on back, some decision, for example, study architect, sounds really important, but at the moment that we take it, it was really natural, really easy to take it, you know, it was something natural. And that is the best way to choose, you know, I think, when you don't have to, when nobody push you to do something and nobody, and the circumstance just to push to go in one line, and that's it. But I think it sounds really important to know where is coming the architecture. But for me, I could say the real one when I was in Venice. After that, I ended my real career in Chile, you know, when I really start to study at Venice. I got really good teachers there, really masters, and because they really joyful about the architect, and was really important about for me at that moment. And on this moment, I start the architect, from the real one, you know, I would like to be architect. Not before. I finished the career and I'm still more or less in the same way. And I mean, I just saying it's not about a propose. It's about that will happen for sure. If it have to happen, that's it.
It sounds very encouraging, doesn't it? And I'm also very, very touched because I know that here we have also some Venetians or adopted Venetians like me. We're all very touched and grateful. Venice is very present in your life and in your presentation. And what about you, Jakun?
我最初我大学是学的建筑学，我学建筑学的原因是听说建筑学要画画。
So back in the university, I chose architecture because I heard that architecture contains like drawing stuff.
因为在我开始学习建筑的那个年代，中国已经有10年没有大学招生这个事情了。
Because back in the era when I was studying, entering university, China has like a 10-year span of no students because of the Cultural Revolution.
因为文革，我以为我认识了很多朋友啊，这些朋友都是画家，现在是中国的大画家。我觉得是因为他们画得太好，他们把我逼到了建筑学这一条道路上。
Also, back in the days, I have a lot of painter friends that are great artists in China right now. So I think it's because they are too good at drawing, they kind of force me to study architecture instead.
所以交朋友要小心啊。
So you have to be careful when choosing your friend.
然后我学习了建筑学，但是我又认识到我不能成为一个像他们那么好的画家，所以我兴趣慢慢就转向了文学。
So after I studied architecture, and then I realized that I could not become a great painter like my friends. So I slowly transitioned into literature.
我都大学毕业都10多年了，我一直没有对建筑学有多么感兴趣，因为我没有认识到建筑学和我之间的那种怎么内心的关系。
So for more than a decade after I graduated from architectural school, I wasn't really passionate about about architecture because I couldn't find a connection, and I couldn't find like a intrinsic relationship between me and architecture.
都是毕业10多年以后，我的同学已经在办个人展览了。
So it's only after almost like more than 10 years that my classmates have been having their personal exhibitions already.
我突然发现，我在那个展览上突然发现，哦，原来建筑学可以表达文字不能表达的某些东西啊。
It was at those exhibitions by my friends that I realized that I can use architecture to express things that I cannot do in literature.
我认为我是在我同学的展览上被激活的，我重新成了一个对建筑人啊，我一下就感觉到了那个好像学了自行车，很多年不骑，突然有一天开始骑，仍然会啊，就那种感觉，我觉得我是在我同学的展览上被激活的。
So I think it was at my classmates' personal exhibitions that I find that architecture was revitalized in my heart, and then it was kind of like riding a bike. You don't ride it for over 10 years, but when you start riding it again, you still have the momentum.
所以其实是首先你内心要有什么东西需要表达，然后你会在各种学习的过程中碰到你的那个表达工具。
It's always you always have a lot of expression in yourself, and then it is during the process when these expressions will find themselves.
我是觉得在毕业了这么多年以后，我又重新碰到了建筑啊，所以我后来就一直在做建筑，成为了建筑师。
I felt like after 10 years of not doing architecture, I met architecture again, and then that's how I started continue to do it.
And Francis, you told us already a little bit about your double encounter with architecture, but I remember you saying that this goes even far more back in time, and your first encounter with architecture has something to do with a palaver tree and your grandmother being embraced by her together with your sibling, right?
No, I mean, normally when sitting and looking to every places where you have been, I just sit and feel like a little student, however, to seeing to really what you have discovered. And so listen about literature. Sometimes I feel a little bit, so should I mimic to have seen a lot, to have been an intellectual, or should I put us into the reality? And then I think that facing this reality has brought me here. So I grew up in a place where there was no school, honestly. And to be able to really attend education, I needed to leave the village when I was 7. And carrying with me the stories of the grandmother, the grandfather, and the songs, you know, what they have experienced. If to go in a place is forbidden, what will happen to you? And if you don't care for the community, what could happen to you? And so we absorbed these, and I left this village and went to the city by a guest family where I was almost alone. What was key to me is sitting in a classroom where it was dark. So when you're talking about things to the darkness and looking to the Chandigarh, and I was saying my childhood was a lot of sun outside, but inside it was always dark, you know. And I was sitting in the class and thinking, why we don't have more light? Could we make bigger openings? And but I was little, I couldn't do nothing against it, and it was very, very hot. And I remember sitting with more than 120, and today it's still the same. Even in the capital city, you will see classrooms where kids are sitting to more than 100 in a class. But that was, during my childhood, I was always thinking, how can I improve this situation? And one thing I could do is the fact that we were sitting in benches. And honestly, you know, kids, and especially African kids, if you put them a mouse in somewhere, they try to find a game they have to play. And one of the game was to like wobbling on these long benches. And then we wobble so often that the Nile will be popping out and it will hurt us. And you don't tell home, because if you tell home what you're being doing, you're destroying material from the school you get from your mother. So, and I decided to do an internship in the carpentry to learn how to fix the benches. And that was my first attempt to normalize, to contribute, to create something. And I did it so well that then my guest family started to respect me because I could fix the benches home. And then I went good school, and then I got a little scholarship dedicated to kids from villages that came for the city to be able to pursue elementary school. And there was an option to become a carpenter, electrician, a mason, or someone who could draw, technical drawer. And my friends, all my friends belongs to the weakest. But as you know, I had like an access to carpentry, and everyone who was weak was sent to carpentry. And the best ones should do mechanic, electrician. So, and I was one of the best in the class because school has saved me from hard working back in that days. If I go to school, it was like a game for me, I was playing. And what happened is I got oriented to become an electrician because they think I was smart. And electricity is like, not for you guys here, but in my place was like a miracle, honestly. And what happened was that I went, and all my friends was in carpentry. I said, okay, are you going to study with all your friends? I mean, you have to carefully choose your friend. You're right.
Always,
right.
always.
What he said is right. But mine was like the weakest. And I went to cry and say, I cannot do this magic thing. I have to be with my friends. And they changed, and I should become a carpenter. But I forget my big extended African family. I went back home very proud that I will become a carpenter. My father not, my mother not, none of my family, direct family member, but your uncle, cousin, everything. Are you stupid? You are the best in the school. Instead of becoming an electrician or a mechanic, you want to do carpentry. We have no wood in Burkina Faso. Everyone put me so under pressure. I went back to school at the starting, I started to cry again. I remember this old director of the school from France, Franciscan, not monk, yeah, Franciscan monk. He says, mon petit gars, on n'en peut plus. Tu as choisi, tu étais électricien. Tu étais le meilleur de l'école et on t'a orienté en électricité. Tu viens pleurer que tu veux devenir menuisier. Ah mais on peut pas. Maintenant, tu es un menuisier. Tu vas rester un menuiserie. Every time when I wake up, I remember these sentences. And so I had to become a carpenter. But thanks to that, we finished. I went to the capital city, and the German government was looking for people to be trained as better carpenter to go to Germany. But because of the nature of the carpentry, the elite was not interested. Who study and to become carpenter? No one will do that. And so I got a chance to get this scholarship that brought me to Germany. And when I arrived, after the program, I asked to do more. I asked them, I was a good carpenter in Burkina Faso. I could make roofs, I could make benches. Now with the training I have here, I'm even better. What I want to know how you draw and how you layer bricks. So when I go back to Burkina, I will build the entire school by myself. That is not a joke, that was my vocation, honestly. But the director looked at me, a great German, looked and said, no, Herr Kere, das geht nicht. So, no, Mr. Kere, that is not, it will not work. The thing you have to do, you have to go back and then be carpenter. And I started to struggle. And then one day he told me, but what you want to do is called to become architect. I said, oh, I want to become that. I want to become architect. I didn't know what it was, honestly. And they told me, but you need to have a degree to access university. I had no degree. And I asked, what can I do? So what I'm trying to tell you is about access and about opportunities. So I keep, and potentially resilience. I keep insisting, and I said, okay, there is an evening school in Berlin dedicated to adults. They can just do classes during the evening to have a high school degree to be able to become architect. And I asked, can I do that? And I went at evening, 6 p.m. to 11 p.m. During the day, I work as a carpenter, sometimes for newspaper, for 4 years. The degree was like after 4 years. But I couldn't finish because in the meantime, the pressure from home has arrived, from Burkina Faso. My mother writing me letters. I was supposed to be the one who will write letters in the village, but I was not there. She went to the city, asked someone to write a letter to her son, who lost his mind because he's staying in Europe, he's not more coming. The pressure was so enormous, I have to go back and explain her, look, I am doing something that will be good for our community. Please let me do it. And she allowed me to go, and I did it. And I started to study architecture. Let's be honest, when you open your office in 95, I started to study architecture in Berlin. That is not a lie. And for the young people, it is about passion. There is different path. And as my new family member will say, don't try to copy him, don't try to copy me. Your way is very, very different. You cannot be Alain Lacaton or Jean-Philippe Vassal. You cannot be, you have to be yourself. That's why you need to find your way. Here, the end of my story was very simple. I studied 2 years. I was curious. I was just absorbing knowledge. And every time when we will build model, that is something I could because I was a carpenter. The other will draw very nicely. And I spent time buying pens to draw, because in Burkina you cannot imagine there is so many pens with this kind of color. And I started using them. One of my assistants thought one day he is not normal. I was normal. I was in the paradise, and I needed to find my way. And my colleague at school will sit, and I will start to sing. And you know what I was singing? Goethe, the poet Goethe, because it was dramatic. It was like Africa. And I will do my model, I will be singing, and the men start to say, So he's not normal. But the girl, wow, exciting. Every girl wanted to work with me, all the girls. And they will gather, and I keep singing. I say, oh, they love it. So keep doing it. And I will do the models, and everyone will start to build models. And after 2 years, I thought I knew enough, because I didn't want to do my degree. I stopped studying, looking for money, and go back to Burkina and do what I wanted to do, to build a better school. This is honest, and this is true. In Berlin, some of the professors still are alive. They will tell you exactly the same. I said, I'm going to build. I went to build, and I came back with the project. I was shocked to present the school. The first row, second, third row were full of professors. And I start my presentation this way. Where were you when I was looking for money to go and build? You know, where were you? Why you didn't give me the money? This is how I started. Honest, very stupid all the time, but that was my way. And all these professors started to support me, first of all, putting me under pressure to do my degree. Then I went back, I started again, and I was saying, no, I know to build. I couldn't travel. So like New York, to visit Versailles, I will say, who can have so much money in Burkina Faso to build a castle for himself? You have to build for the entire family. So I don't go to see it. I need an example that will be good for my community. So I never travel. And then one day I got a job. Germany get reunificated. So properties, state property, and I got a tiny little digital camera to document those property. Of course, at school, I knew about Mies van der Rohe, but it was too big for me. I didn't got it. And then I went to survey one tiny little house Tugendhaus in Berlin. Very, very tiny. I look at the house, I saw the brickwork. It was so simple, but a little project, I said, oh, why didn't they show us at school? Why they keep showing these big things and whatever? And it made click in my head. Oh, what you're doing is also architecture. And so Mies became my hero. Later, Louis Kahn. I started then my study about architecture. I wanted to know how to build. But then I started to study how these people are doing. If you look at many of my buildings in Burkina, you will see details of Mies van der Rohe, the simplicity. I love brick. And to conclude here, there's many ways to bring to architecture. It looks like Goethe, while being transformed to sand, may have listened to me singing about him. So we right now completed a German Goethe Institute in Dakar, in Senegal, and completely out of clay, next to one of the very known poets in Africa, Leopold Sédar Senghor. And you will be surprised, it looks like he has called me to come and launch a debate in Germany. And I started, and nowadays, if you go to Germany, every press organ is talking about someone coming from Burkina Faso who built a clay house, who is going to renovate German architecture and connect the West with the South, to connect Western poet with African poet, using clay, the material of the poor people.
We're definitely getting a lot of insight. And a lot of very good advice, especially from the younger audience. So since I know that we have some questions from the audience, I would just like to conclude with one quick question for each of you. If you want to share any insight or reflection or expectation, maybe in the case of Smiljan, from your Pritzker Prize experience. Who wants to start?
No expectation.
It's too early. It's too early.
Not really.
I do quick and let you do, because my case is very simple. I have to be honest and say, sitting here is also emotional, and I think I will keep being a good builder. Sometime in Germany called, oh, there's a nice young man from Burkina Faso. Now they know where I'm coming from, building nice schools. I will be seeing like this. I have to say that the Pritzker has just transformed my life. It has encouraged me to really talk honestly about the topics that matters. And it has opened a lot of doors. The project I've been working on, I don't think I will ever be invited to do those projects if I haven't won Pritzker. I have a dear friend here, is Anne Lacaton and Jean-Philippe. So we've been doing conferences, are being called everywhere in the West, and Anne is always so angry about these people, inviting Francis, applauding him, celebrating his architecture, but not giving him something to build in the West. And so with this, now the image honestly has changed. I'm not the Western architect who will mimic, he was good already. No, I was someone who has a big heart for his community and for people in general. This is honest, and doing his good work, and someone come and put big light of me, and people start to see and say, wow, we could get him build a museum in Las Vegas for us. That is it, very simple.
How about you, Jakun?
去年1年我接受的采访，比我得奖前一辈子接受的采访都要多。
So for me, last year I had more interviews than the rest of my life.
得奖有一个好处就是独立工作，然后就得了普奖啊，然后得了普奖就那个工作的机会就变得更好。
So one advantage for me winning the Pritzker Award is that I do my hard work, I win the prize, and then I have better opportunities for my project.
有了更好的这种工作的机会，然后工作就更加努力啊。
So when I have better opportunities, I work harder.
所以就变成了努力工作是为了得到更好的工作，所以建筑师是一个很辛苦的职业。
So it becomes that I do hard work to get harder work, and then that's how it works for me.
Well, all my remaining questions will be for next time, because now we would like to leave the floor to the audience, and I know that there are some questions from the students.
Gracias a nuestros panelistas. Ahora abrimos un espacio de preguntas y respuestas seleccionadas aleatoriamente de las personas registradas. Si está por aquí Carla Martínez Cortés, que levante la mano. Ok, Carla, voy a leer tu pregunta para darle más dinamismo. La voy a leer en español y en inglés. ¿Cómo puedes llevar de la mano experimentar con la forma arquitectónica, pero vincularlo con la realidad de las personas que van a habitar el espacio? Yes, how can you balance experimentation with architectural form while still connecting it to the reality of the people who will inhabit the space?
I mean, yeah, I have clients here, you know, I have problems about this question. Yeah, I have to be careful. But normally it's always a game, you know. You have your clients in front of you, or a contest or whatever, and then it's a game. You have a lot of projects on behind you, and some copter of some projects that you want to do it, and some ideas that maybe it's gonna be good to propose them, and they have their own necessity, their own needs, you know. And then it's a combination. The real architect at the end is which ones, someone who could really do it, the things, but just bringing in front of you the client's needs. That is really important, because when you have a really good clients, you know, really smart, the project start to be more complex, and that complexity, not just a poor project like an architect project, you know, that's something more complex, and the reality of that is coming really, really deep, and that is, for me, it's the best. But when you don't have a good client, you are lost at that. And could say, it's a game, you know, and it's not something that you are in one side and the other in another side. It means it's something that you have to do it together, but it's not. It's a joke at the end. It's something, you know, it's something that's in between. It's really weird, the area where you have to move it. But it's really incredible that, because when you do something strange, everybody said, oh, the client give you a freedom, you know, you could do it whatever, and that's great, and lucky for you, but it's not. No, you know, the big problem also of the architect is to convince other to do that things. It's some of the work at the end. And when you visit the Le Corbusier, you could say, well, how Le Corbusier could do the things, you know. It's not because it's because it has maybe an emotional intelligence that is really important in these cases. I don't know. I mean, but I always say, it's something about possibilities, opportunities, and it's something that is on the atmosphere that you have to get it, and that's it. Yeah. Depend of you at the end. Yeah.
Francis,
Me?
you want to say something?
Yeah. So, I mean, everything is already said. I think it's a dialogue. In my case, when I started, I needed to listen to the community. And this has become part of my work. I'm just listening, and sometimes I feel myself as a translator. The client has wishes, and I keep listening. And what I love is the miracle inside, when their ideas, wishes that are not really outspoken. And I will go and try to put on the paper what I have listened to, and this is how I grew up. We have no, it was vocal retransmission, and you need to listen carefully to be able to really do, and I'm translating all of these in the paper and trying to follow some rules that the structure later may stay. Carried from the beginning of my work, but the attention that what happened. So in the Western world, people sometimes may not understand what is happening in our place. In our place, people has very, very long memory. They don't write, but they have very long memory. Sometimes we're joking if you know the local name of a river. I'm not attacking British, I'm not attacking no one. I want to say if you just have a river, you call it Queen Victoria Lake, but we have another name, you know. So in this regard, people never forget. You will see a piece of land that is no boundary, but everyone knows that is a boundary. And so you will see a piece of land, it's beautiful, and it's, oh, I could build a nice house there. So an African will say, there was a water in ancient time, and where there was water, water will come again. So all of these are really guiding me through my work, and what I'm really always doing is to say, even if there is no regulation, you know that you have to do a good work. In my place, it is, if I fail, then long time after me, my daughter, her kids, grandkids later, someone will say, you're from this family. You had an ancestor that was saying he know how to build better. He failed. He built a house that collapsed. So this will go all the way, and that is always, so really like at the beginning, people will call me to go in places. I was afraid I may have introduced something that will bring a shame to my family. And so if I will refuse to go, but actually looking to a client, I'm hoping that the client will be happy, will be inspired by the house. So it is a very different approach, but it is the same. At the end of the day, I really want people to be happy in whatever we're creating, be it the museum actually in Las Vegas, or our huge library that we'll be building in Rio de Janeiro, where the weight of history is there. Is the, so Niemeier's Sembadrome, and we're connecting with that. And there is a fear, the same fear like a Heisengando, to say, people will say that he came and he didn't pay attention to history. So it's always listen, see the dangers, but also for furthermore to look at to the opportunities that are given by this project. That is my green line.
Jakun?
因为我个人不是要执着于某一种特别一看就知道是我做的那样的风格，我的策略是因地制宜。
For me, my concept is is always not having a personal style for me. So one of my methods is to adapt to the local conditions for my project.
所以我每一个项目我都会去首先会去寻找常用的材料和熟悉的做法，就是在当地啊。
So the first thing I do when I do a new project, I go to that place and then find the local materials that's very popular, and also the techniques that's mostly used in that area.
但是有一个问题，如果我仅仅是这样，那别人为什么要找我做？
But the issue is like, if it's only like that, I'm using the local materials. Why do people even find me to do the project?
所以其实是要做实验，不做实验的目的是，一个是要根据自己作为一个外来人，他有一些当地人就是看得见当地人看不见的东西啊。
So for me, one of the experimental part is that you have to be you are an outsider, and then you have to see what the local people don't see in their areas.
对，我要利用这一点，并且就去做实验，使当地的那个大家已经有点习惯了，也觉得是不加思索就这样做的事情，可以提升。这是我做实验的一个目的。
So I want to utilize this element that I want to have the elements being emphasized from my work that local people will probably don't see in their.
所以我觉得在这样的工作中，自身就会有一个平衡。虽然我在做实验，但是 我所寻找的那些熟悉的材料和熟悉的做法，已经自己也在平衡它的那个实验性和现实性。
So this is how, like for my project, how the balance works is while you're doing the experiment, you also have the reality with which is the local materials or techniques they use.
当然，有时候就是也会为了实验而实验，有时候会有这样的机会啊。
And sometimes I do have like some opportunities to experiment for the sake of experimentation.
我刚才讲到我小时候跟我一起学画画的那些艺术家，他们后来就过了20年，他们就变成著名的画家了我就走上了建筑的道路，但是在这个时段，他们只认识我一个建筑师所以我就有机会来做实验，而且他们也非常信任我。
So for the artists that I like the painters I mentioned before, my artist friends, they after 20 years of knowing them, they become very famous painters, and then I become the only architect that they know. So when they're building their studios, I get the chance to experiment.
所以秘密有时候比较奇怪。
So life is kind of strange sometimes.
Ok, pasamos a la siguiente pregunta. Si está la estudiante Vanessa Zulema Pérez Jiménez, que levante la mano. Bueno, leo su pregunta. ¿Qué opina de las nuevas tecnologías que se han implementado en diferentes ámbitos? Por ejemplo, la inteligencia artificial empleada en la arquitectura. Dicha arquitectura perdería la identidad o criterio a como se hacía de forma tradicional. ¿O cuál es su postura ante este fenómeno? What is your opinion on the new technologies being implemented across different fields? For example, AI in architecture. Do you think architecture risks losing its identity or critical judgment compared to traditional methods? Or what is your position regarding this phenomenon?
I think this question is for you, Smiljan.
Really?
Yes.
And I mean, I'm not worried about the artificial intelligence. You know, it's really stupid to think in something that you don't know what mean. In the sense of you really don't know what is going to happen about that. I mean, I could say that I'm really worried about the natural intelligence. That we have to worry about that, and you have to worry about that. About to read, about to travel, to have good relation with the others, and to live in a good way, I could say. And then the other thing you could manage. It's another instrument at the moment. I don't know what is going to happen, but I'm not really care about what is going to happen with the architect. We have to see, you know, in the future, and that's it. I mean, to wait a little bit. I didn't use. I used this time just to translate many interviews, you know. It was so quickly because I received an interview. I just wrote on Spanish and translated the AI, and in 2 hours I have the 18 answers. Did it, and it was so fast. In this moment, I answered more than 60 interviews all around the world, and the EA was really amazing about that. I'm really grateful in this moment about this instrument, but I think it's an instrument. I mean, I'm really worried about for the young people about the natural intelligence. You know, how do and I could say that we talked about this yesterday. I don't remember. For example, in my studio, always we more or less. I have some German people, right now not, and for a long time I had a Japanese guy who was amazing, and right now I just Chilean's one, because it's just my connection with the academy, and I could not teach it in another way. And it's really funny because when you got guys who came from the countryside, it's really different from the guys who came from the city. Normally the countryside are more flexible intellectually, and that is really important because they have more instrument how to get the reality, and for me, and you could see the difference in some details, you know, but it's important. I mean, that's natural intelligence, you know, not it's not so sophisticated the concept, but we have to worry about that, about that kind of things more than the others. My son is mathematics. He's doing mathematics, and then And he talked sometimes about, easy concepts. I could not understand anything, and that is great, because it's another world, and it's really beautiful at the end. I mean, there's something beautiful inside of that kind of things, but you have to find it. And I don't know. I mean, I really don't care if it's not the questions. I mean, I really don't care about it.
We have time, I think, for one last question.
Así es, pasamos a la última pregunta de Andrea Montserrat Carranza García. Okay. La forma de cada uno de sus proyectos es irrepetible. Además del contexto y la materialidad, ¿qué otros factores influyen en su diseño? The form of each of your projects is unique and unrepeatable. Beyond context and materiality, what other factors influence your design process?
This is clearly for you, Smiljan.
I mean, many others. It's really false that in my way to think, the architect, that when you start a project, you're coming for a white page. You have a lot of prejudice or concepts that is coming before and before and before. And when you have 60 years old, like me, I feel more. Normally the people talk that when you are young, you could experiment more. I think when you are old, you could experiment too much more, because you have the experience, and the experience is really close to the experiment things, new ones, because you could take the positions and decisions really fast, and you could have the possibility all around you really easily. And I think in this after the 50s, I could say, I feel in my way to think the architect as a kind of flexibility that I could not have before. And that flexibility is because I have more concepts around me, and I could choose this concept more easy. And because that, and you have a lot of prejudice, how do you say? Prejudice, and that is really good, I think. I mean, you have to be in a not in a line, in a lot of line where you could discuss what is the best and what is not. And normally there's not discussion, because when I arrive at a project, you normally more or less you know how to respond, but it's not because you have an epiphany, it's just because you thought about that before, you just thought about this reality before that the problem came, and that's it. I mean, but it's case by case, and depend of the people who are taking the decisions. It's not a rule at the end.
Well, thank you, Jacun. Thank you, Smiljan. Thank you, Francis. Thank you, Monica. You were the most wonderful, warmest host ever. Thank you, UNAM, and thank you, Mexico.
Por favor, permanezcan en su lugar. Vamos a sacar una fotografía grupal.
Go here.
Muchas gracias a todos por su presencia.
Anda a hacer eso en la Católica.